Welcome to the Hands That Built Star Wars panel today. I'm feeling so incredibly honored to welcome a true legend of industrial light and magic to the stage today. Someone whose fingerprints, sometimes literally, are on some of the most iconic models in cinema history. From the Millennium Falcon to the Death Star trenches to anything you might possibly see in the originals and Star Wars, he helped craft the galaxy we all love with amazing attention to detail and imagination. Everybody, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Lorne Peterson.
That's for him.
I have one good ear, so this is the appropriate side.
Perfect. This is great. Awesome. Wow, how are you doing today, Lorne?
Good.
Good.
A little
I'm glad.
chilly, but perfectly
It is
good.
very cold in here. It is very cold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does seem like cold, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm old enough and it preserves me a little bit longer.
Well, we'd love to have you for much, much longer. But, you know, Lorne, you've been a part of Star Wars since the very beginning, shaping ships and worlds, and I and all of us have dreamed about forever. If you think back to those days, first days at ILM, before anyone knew what Star Wars was and knew that it would become a phenomenon, what did that model shop feel like? Can you tell us what sounds, sights, smells, like what instantly brings you back to that model shop?
You know, I was hired for, I think, a month. And what that is they hire you to probably say, oh, you know, he made it or didn't make it. And if he didn't make it, you know, 1 month later, they'd say, okay, see you later. But here's one thing that happened. And I'm getting a little bit off the subject, but it's an interesting story. Is when I arrived there, I did the awful job. They asked me to work on the Death Star, which meant you worked all day on your knees, which was not everybody else wanted to do that. But I started to notice that the way that they were making the models was they took 5-minute epoxy, mixed it up, and they put parts on and they put masking tape over it. Then they would go on to 1 or 2 other parts, but the epoxy would get too hard by that time. And I personally, we had our own shop and we did industrial models and everything like that. And cyanoacrylate glue or super glue, that kind of thing, had come out. And you could buy it you could buy it for the industry, but you couldn't buy it retail. And so I came in with a bottle of it the next day, and I asked the model makers, everybody stop? There was only 6 of us, or 5 model makers. I said, here's a pencil, and I cantilevered it out from a table, and I put 1 dot, and I removed my hand, and 2/3 of the pencil was remaining out over, and they gasped, of course, you know, how in the world did you do that? You know, they'd never seen anything like that. So in a way, that's from that point on, no one was asking that I was only supposed to be there for a month. You know, that nobody ever brought it up 10 years later, or 20 years later, or 30 years later. But that changed everything with model making. You can just imagine having to make all those models with 5-minute epoxy as opposed to super glue. It just, maybe 5 years later, we would have been ready to film or something like that.
Wow. That's incredible. You know, piggybacking off of those first days at ILM, at that Van Nuys location, you've told a story, and it's one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard you tell, about how George Lucas randomly came into ILM one night. And would you like to take it away?
Sure. I had for sure seen American Graffiti, but you know, at that time, it doesn't mean that the director's pictures were all over Time magazine or anything like that. You know, it was a good picture, but there was an emphasis on the director. So what had happened was when I was hired, it was just for a science fiction film. You know, and there wasn't that much. I knew that George Lucas, a guy named George Lucas that did American Graffiti, was going to be the director. And I sometimes stayed late at night because John and I ran our own business, Industrial Design Models, in the morning and after we got home at 8 o'clock or so. So we ran ragged, and then we had employees that we had work in our shop. So we were running, we thought, well, it's only going to be a short project. We need to maintain our clients. And it was okay with the company to do that. So I stayed late many times, and I was there by myself in the shop, and a guy shows up, kind of shorter, darker hair with a beard, and I knew that if he came into the room, he had to have gone through the front office, and he was an official person. It was probably from the studios or something like that. And when he came in, he looked around, and so I introduced myself. And he didn't introduce himself, but I told him, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, this happens here, without giving any story points away or anything like that. I kind of let him know kind of what it was and the details on things, and I showed him. And maybe 2 days later or 3 days later, the same thing happened. He showed up, he says, hi again, and I had a little conversation. George isn't like a big conversationalist though, and so then maybe a week later, I was in the screening room, and he was sitting on one of the couches with people in the room, but all the questions went his directions, and I thought, oh, he's not just anybody, no. He's the director, and that was the first time I realized that he was the director, because he's very understated. On Empire, 6 of us had moved up north to restart doing Star Wars. The first Star Wars was done in Van Nuys, and he chose, the way I've talked about it, he chose 6 people, is if you make a super custom-made Ferrari, and the suspension is totally different than any other suspension, and the engine is different, and the bodywork is different than any other car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To reproduce it, you get one guy that knows the suspension. You get one guy that gets this kind of stuff. And that way, he got the chief person that knew what to do with it. But with only 6 people to say, well, you're going to work on a multi-million-dollar film and you have to hire all these people. You can't, they didn't want us to hire people up from LA to steal people away from other companies. So it was quite a job to do that. But anyway, George had come, I knew George was coming into the model shop, and so I had like 5 questions I wanted to ask him about different directions or how we were going to go. And I started reading off my questions, I narrowed them down to 3, figured he wouldn't sit still for 5. And I just barely got into 15 seconds into the first questions. And he said, he looked at my paper and he said, that looks like your job to me. And I never ever asked him what he wanted from that point on. And he never really came in and said, this is what I want. It was like, I thought that's the way directors do it. They delegate, and they hire people that do the theme of what they want to do, generally what they want to do, but know how to expand upon, come up with other magical things that he never would have thought about. So it's a very interesting, you want to stay to the theme of what he wants to do, but your job is to even think beyond what he first conceives, And it was kind of interesting, a very challenging way to live. To do your job, And I've always said that somebody said, well, how do you come up with all the ideas? In a way, what happens is if you answer a couple of questions in a very wonderful, magical way, visually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the expectation is that you'll do it again. And so you get asked to do the next level up of question, the next level, the next level, the next level. And pretty soon it's assumed that you will be able to do whatever you want to do. An example of that is Spielberg, early on, we would have these round tables with the directors, and there's about 6 people from different parts in the ILM, and the director and his assistant and everything, and we're all got the storyboards in front of us. And what he wants to do is he wants to go page by page and talk about whose job this will be, and what does he think this person will do, and that kind of thing. And when they got to the imploding house for Poltergeist, he turns the page, and it's the imploding house. And I'd seen the storyboard before, not too much earlier. And he said, Lorne, what do you think we're going to do here? Imploding house. And I said, well, we'll do it the same way a magician produces a bouquet of flowers out of a magic wand. the flowers are paper mache, and he hits the wand and out pops the thing, but it actually also can go back into the wand, so it unfolds. And he goes, oh yeah, next, and he opens the next page and goes on. So it was just like that little moment of going like, okay, he knows we're going to do something. He's going to come up with something. It's not going to be the magic wand and all that stuff, but it's it actually was quite a bit like the magic wand. Everything pulled down into a very large funnel with little tiny steel, real like 3,000 steel wire. A human hair is about 3,000. That was maybe a little bit more than that. And then the little tiny wires like that led to other 32nds and then 16th and on and on and on to 1/4-inch cables. And then we pulled a forklift, got hooked up to a pulley with and I did the forks raised and sucked the house done like a kite down into the cavity. But it's kind of like that kind of engineering became part of the job. How to, me and other people that were in the model shop had a very good understanding of the physics of things. And not everybody did, but we all knew like, well, what looks real, what doesn't look real. And I one time used the example of you have the audience, and they're like a cat with a real mouse or a mechanical mouse. Well, a mechanical mouse, a cat would understand it really quickly. They sometimes would play the game, but if they're not the same, the muscles wouldn't go into the same position as a real mouse. And an audience is like that even though they didn't study physics, they've known the real world. They know that things fall down. They know that, newspapers don't fall like a lead brick and all that stuff. So you're trying to, you realize that, so the physics of things has to be correct. It has to be reasonable and real. Certain things don't bounce, certain things do bounce, and on and on and on. So that became more and more and more part of the job, was to have that kind of understanding. But the requests became higher and higher, and the expectations became higher and higher and higher.
Because you've talked about how your position with George as a director and a model maker, that was an interesting relationship. But you get into, working with Ralph McQuarrie and people like Colin Cantwell on the Blockade Runner.
Yeah.
And what was that creative back and forth like with the concept art and the model shop?
A guy named Colin Cantwell did the very original little models. So George, he made them so that George could be in front of producers, studio executives, and he could hold up a model and say, okay, Luke is a spaceship kind of like this. It wasn't really like what ultimately became, and a Star Destroyer will kind of be like this. And but we actually never dealt with Colin Cantwell. I've never seen him face to face. We just heard about him.
Sure.
We had his models and all that stuff. And Ralph McQuarrie was the concept artist, and his little paintings, he did amazing little paintings about this big and about 2.5 inches wide that had the kind of the sand crawler. It had C-3PO, just a couple of strokes of gold, and as simple paintings as you can do of that size. And from that we leaped. He did those by talking to George, and George said, well, I don't know, there's a character, a kind of a gold robot, and George and Ralph is like, gold robot, with 3 strokes. And so those are the kind of things that we started off from. Our art director, Joe Johnson, would then take some sketches and drawings and work from there. But it was a very free and loose thing. The expectation was that the people that worked in the model shop knew very well how to take 2-dimensional artwork and change it into 3-dimensional models. And again, the expectation became higher and higher and higher. An example of that is with the fencing droid. I was asked one day, we need a fencing droid. It's this thing that Luke competes with, And I said, well, what do you want? And he said, well, go up and talk to the art department and Joe Johnson and see what he says. And I said, they need a fencing droid, and blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, give me 10 minutes. And so I went downstairs and had a cup of coffee and came up, and he had some tissue paper he did some little sketches on. And then we went downstairs, and it's what I used to call a one-day wonder. There were a couple of models that took 1 day or 2 days, and the fencing droid was a 2-day model or something like that. The escape pod was maybe 4 days, that kind of thing. But when you're doing things for a movie, you know that you can only have 1.5 years to do it, and you only have a limited amount of money to spend. You can't make a jewel, a giant ruby for a shot that's only going to be 2 seconds long, something like that. So you have to get a feel for what it's worth. Anyway.
I love your stories. I really do. I love just hearing you talk about it all so real, because you were the one who built this world for us. It's beautiful. And when you talk about the original ILM family, which is what it was, at the Van Nuys location, I've heard stories about a slip and slide or a tub. Can you tell me a little bit about those times?
Yeah, sure. Just like here, LA and the Valley can get into the high 90s, a little bit 110, 105. And the building we had was like a warehouse about the size, not quite the size of this room. And it had no air conditioning, it just had it really didn't even have vents in the back. So it could be 99 outside and it could be 110 inside. So then there was an airplane salvage place right across the street, and people would go over there just to hunt for weird things or come back with things. And somebody came back with the slide, the big orange or yellow slide that comes out the side of an airplane. And we had the ability to inflate it. We inflated the thing, and then people realized we could make a slip and slide out of it, a really good one, and put cushions at the end for when you dropped off the end, and we had people hose it off, mist it off, and people brought their bathing suits. And we did that only at lunchtime. But a group of executives did come in a limousine one time, and they started to pull into the parking lot, and they saw what was happening, and then they backed out and drove away.
Oh, no.
And the producer probably had to do a bit of explaining, they made themselves a cold plunge in the parking lot out of a big military case. Yeah. It was we were only the youngest one was 19, Pete Coran, and I was the second of the oldest. I was 30, just turning 30. Wow. And quite frankly, there was only like 3 women that worked there in the front office. And so we had parties on Friday night. We'd clear the area and have a dance floor, and we made sure that we had these huge Yamaha speakers, and we had a good sound system. Songs in the Key of Life was a really big album, and Fleetwood Mac and the Rhiannon and Supertramp and things like that. So we could really blow the walls out, and it was like an industrial park, so there was no big deal. And nobody had an accident on the way home. Nobody crashed a car, even though they were all young and probably drank too much. And
that's good.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
But
I've heard a lot of.
We had a good time.
That's amazing. I love hearing that stories. My next question was, what was the music that you guys listened to?
Yeah.
And Fleetwood Mac, it makes so much sense.
Reggae also. We were really big on reggae.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I love, because I've actually visited the original Van Nuys location, and I've discovered new things, and I've discovered on one of the walls one of the original circuit breakers, and this one goes to the model shop.
It still has where the model shop was, and where the wood shop, and where the
right. And one was rotoscoping upstairs. It had everything. But what's funny, I've noticed there's a door to nowhere upstairs. You open a door and it's just a complete 20-foot drop. So what I heard, it was a story from Ben Burt, who's the sound designer for Star Wars, about how you guys had to build facades in front of certain things because they weren't to code whenever people came by to inspect the place.
Oh, well, yes, it wasn't to code because what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring the forklift and move things in and out of that room.
Yeah.
And I guess if you do it to code, you really need to have a lot of safety requirements, that has a sliding door that always slides back, it has a warning light, all that stuff. And it's true in many cases, even when we moved up north, we built a lot of things. No one ever went and got it to code and all that stuff, even a second story. But we hired really good carpenters and plumbers and all that stuff. They were very happy to work for us. But somebody had came up with the idea, because it was an empty warehouse, like maybe two-thirds the size of this room. And somebody came up with the idea that they told the carpenters, we want so many 12-foot boards, we want so many 8-foot boards, we want 18-foot boards, we want 24 2x4s. So, and some shorties. And what we did was we laid out the rooms with 2x4s. So you'd have a hallway and a doorway, and then this would be a room that would be this wide, have a back entrance, to a hallway, et cetera, et cetera. And they just went to it, pound, and made walls where we just laid the 2x4s. So it was a very easy way. There were no drawings or anything. And then somebody said, well, where do you want electrical outlets? And tape, on top of the walls. And the electricians would come in and sweep in and do the stuff. And then we made a second story inside the warehouse, which we didn't ask permission to do that. And but the inspectors did show up one day, and they had a big lunch ready for them, a little layout of
to butter them up,
meat and stuff like that. And then of course we were Star Wars stuff, and guys that smoked went upstairs and really smoked up the rooms, tried to, and put a number of phone numbers on the wall, written and all that stuff, and smudged things, trying to pretend like the room had actually been there for a while. They didn't care what at all. They were like, show us some film, show us some models, and nothing like that was going to happen. We got to be the golden children in a way. There's always a million stories, but another one there that I one time decided I only lived 3 miles from work, and I was going to go to work really early in the morning before anybody was up. We could all come and go anywhere we wanted. We had the code numbers, and so I thought, I'm going to try to go to work as fast as I can. I had a 64 Porsche at that time, and nice. I just went around corners as fast as I could, and like that. And I made it. I got to work, and I'm heading down to the last turn, the right-hand turn, and I looked way up in the mirror, and way in the background there was a police light, And I thought, oh my God, somebody saw me. So I quickly went down and I made the right-hand turn. I pulled into the little parking lot right in front of the building. I rushed out of my car. I'm at the code machine, and I'm like this, and oh God, I must have been driving too fast. And there's a police car, and the guy comes out of the car, and I'm saying, oh God, I guess I was driving a little fast, wasn't I? And he said, how's the film going? And
wow.
We started talking about that, and he wanted to know the two guy, was it one guy or two guy? I don't remember, but anyway, they wanted to know this and that, and I said, oh yeah, we're doing this, we're doing that, and he said, well, keep up the good work, drive a little slower, I'll see you later. And
wow.
It was like, wowee.
Wow.
The various things you could get away with we had such an impact on a small town. Mm-hmm. The amount of money that we were spending was considerable. It just changed the restaurants, it changed all kinds of service industries and things like that in the town because Lucasfilm was there and we were spending big bucks.
Absolutely. And you can still feel that. When you go there to this day, you can still feel that energy at that location. Have you been back since?
The old place?
Yeah.
Yes, I have, for a party. Yeah. We were really party animals any celebration. But I was talking about the new location up in Northern California.
The Kerner, right? Kerner Optical, yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
And that's still there, although it's a health facility now. It's a long story how it was donated stocks that went through the roof that created health facilities in Marin County for poor people.
Yeah, wow. Well, I want to go back to when we were talking about what George wanted from you guys. He famously wanted a used universe, essentially. Not something shiny like Flash Gordon, but what did that mean for you and your team when you were building models? Like, how did you make that come to fruition via model making and painting?
Yeah, it's that thing about a used universe. It's like, how did it actually get down to us? It must have been like a billiard ball flying back in the machine, and then we got, somebody said use universe, or a boilerplate technology. We weren't doing. It's like, no way in the world would there would be a piece of steel bent to shape that's 100 feet long. It would be made out of different riveted areas together, much like the Titanic would have been made or something like that. So you had to see the mechanics of how the thing was put together. And then, of course, it was very good to put oil streaks and everything. All that stuff adds scale to it. Definitely. It's almost like, was it the necessity to make scale? And of course, George he didn't want Flash Gordon.
Right.
He didn't want that kind of a world. The good guys had junkers, hot rods put together. He was big into car racing when he was before college. He knew, he one time bought a used Ferrari, a Dino, and it arrived on a thing, but it needed some work and so all the model shop went out there to see the Ferrari, on a truck and all that stuff.
No way.
Which leads to another story. There's an interesting thing that the Death Star was originally done as a painting, a two-dimensional painting. Mm-hmm. And George said, well, I want a little movement to, make it feel like it's 3 dimensions and all that stuff. And so they tried a little tiny movement, but if you do too much movement on a flat artwork, it gives it away. So they did a little bit of movement, and he said, yeah, it's in a screening room like this in the dark. And he's like, I don't know, it's still not, it still doesn't look quite right. Well, let's try one more day. And they, no, it still doesn't look right. And he says, Lorne, I'm back there somewhere. Lorne, we work up how much it's going to cost to actually make a 3-dimensional Death Star. And so I made it at like 3.5 feet. It was going to be that. I planned out how much money it was going to be. And of course, the people that were in production, the producers, the money people, were like, "Oh God, we already have the painting done, and couldn't he use that?" They're not saying this to him, but they're saying to Lorne, how much money is this going to cost and all this stuff. I'm working on it. So the next day that he was there, probably 2 days away or something like that, and in the dark, he says, Lorne, how much money is that going to cost? And I said, it's going to cost a little bit less than the Ferrari you bought the other day. Right. And he says, that's all? It's a done deal.
Wow.
Great. And because he paid $40,000 for it.
Oh my
and money was different at that time.
It was.
And the car needed work.
Yeah.
But so George left the room at the end of the screening room, and so I left pretty quickly too. Mm-hmm. And I could hear these footsteps behind me in the hallway and then up the stairs. They other people trying to catch up with clipboards.
Right.
And I knew what they wanted. We met at my desk, and they were like, well, how much money are we talking about, And because they already, there was a budget we were all trying to stick to. Mm-hmm. And I told them how much money it was, and they were like, oh. Okay, but George had already said, it's a done deal, we're going to make the big Death Star.
What George says goes.
What's that?
What George says goes. You kind of have to listen to him.
Yeah, what George says goes, especially when I printed it that way, if I'd said the amount of money in the screening room, there might have been a discussion about it, other people would have chimed in, but they had no idea how much money he spent for the thing, so we kept them in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned putting so much work into, the Death Star and the shots of the trench and how much work goes into like building these incredible models like X-Wings, and then you blow them up. How does that feel?
You know,
what's the difference between building
the
a
blowing
pyro?
up thing is actually fun. You know, it's like everybody, a lot of the people at work, especially in the model shop, when they were boys, blew models up with firecrackers, you know.
Right.
So it's an extension of that. But in reality, we had to make duplicates that were made out of materials that would break up easily. You know, because if you just take a sheet of styrene, even vacuum form styrene, and you put explosives on the inside of it, it just blows away as a big sheet of plastic. Plastic doesn't, it bends and flexes and all that stuff. So we had to experiment to come up with the more brittle materials to mold, to polyester breaks up. But that was a really big problem as to, well, how are we going to take, you know, man-made materials and make it break up easily, the models like that. So we spent a lot of time cutting the backside, making weak places and all that stuff, and added, well, one of the things, a clever thing, I wasn't the one who thought of it, but for the explosions, you're constantly trying to, a problem with scale. Fire, water, things like that don't scale down at all. And then here we were going to explode them. So, of course, they shot them high-speed camera, so that would slow down the explosion. But one of the things we added to it, we took sawdust, little chips of sawdust, and we soaked them in gasoline in a bag, and then we added that to the models. So when it exploded, they all lit up, and they had very little mass because they're sawdust compared to like a BB or a lead shot or something like that, would just shoot across the room. But a piece of sawdust that's flaming, and because it's moving so fast that just the flames just fly out the back end, the inertia breaks down, and they go like that and slow down, and they make it really look like it's far away. So that really helped explosions to slow the look down even more. So if you see something, a battleship exploding in the distance of the horizon, it's like it rises like 1/8 of an inch, and then the smoke comes up 1/4 of an inch by how it, or fireworks from far away. They look different, and it says that's really far away. You know, one of the reasons we never had anything chrome, we didn't want Flash Gordon, but the reflection on a miniature piece of chrome totally gives away the scale of what the model is. So even if you're making old-fashioned military ships and everything, like you paint them gray, do not ever have a shiny stainless steel piece of anything, because that would totally give away the scale. Anyway.
Is there a model that you worked on that you find to be underrated for you? Like you loved working on that thing, but maybe it didn't become something huge like the sand crawler or something else. Maybe a little something that you made.
Well, I could start a list of underappreciated.
Please, I'm ready.
But the model makers are like, there's sometimes we said, there should be a model shop edition of Star Wars where the dialogue would be, and then there would be a slow, beautiful shot of the model, and then dialogue come in, and over again. So it'd be this, just this lovingly photographed thing of the models. Yeah. The execution arena was just a beautiful model. It was we made it like a pie shaped, so the diameter was maybe 25 feet or something like that, and it was just beautifully carved. What we would do is we'd carve it with knives during the day, and then after everybody left, I would take the sandblaster with walnut shells, ground up walnut shells. You can buy walnut shells, everything from the finest powder you've ever seen to about 1/8-inch particles, and it's used for sandblasting, and it's not environmentally friendly. You can take the paint off of ships, and it isn't like using abrasives that are not natural. Anyway, so we used walnut shells for all kinds of things, different scale, to scale sand. So we'd measure the size of a piece of sand in Yuma, and then come up with a material that was scaled down from the sand in Yuma. because that would give it away. And but anyway, it was a beautiful model, and yes, it's worked well, but they put in kind of a fog, like an atmosphere, and it's like, oh, the beauty of the model is a little bit fade.
Well, I will say, if you want to see beautiful shots of these models, you can check out Lorne's book. You have a book called Modeling a Galaxy.
Sculpting of a Galaxy,
Yeah, and it has beautiful shots. I went to the Los Angeles Public Library the other day, and I sat in the library just flipping through this beautiful book. And there are just these beautiful images of these models. So please check out his book if you haven't already. I'm sure you have, because it's iconic.
Yeah.
But
it's a book that's very, very hard to get. Libraries have it. And I don't want to poo-poo my own book, but
You can.
it was written a long time ago under a bit of duress. I'm not a born and bred writer. Without a cell phone and a computer, they would get in touch with me like on a Thursday and say, chapter 2, we have to have you rewrite and eliminate down to one page has to disappear. And I'd be like, oh my God, my weekend of two-finger typing, of modifying the chapter. And then they'd do the same thing a week later or 2 weeks later, and it was emergency after emergency. But I never, ever would have done a book like that myself. In 5 years, maybe I would have written it. But they had me like a racehorse making that book. And it's not the later models, the latter models, everything became more elaborate, more beautiful, wonderful. The scale of things, eventually CG took over desktop models. And so we went off into making what we called bigatures in a way, rather than miniatures. And like Mustafar, the lava planet was not maybe a third the size of this room. It was really big, and it cost as much as a Ferrari. Wow. It used in 400 shots, and George absolutely loved it. But the whole thing had chain hoist, and we could raise the back of it like a wheelbarrow to get the lava flow faster. It had to have giant pumps and filters, and you'd get in touch with an engineering company and tell them this is the viscosity of the material we're going to be used. We have to filter out the crust and all that stuff. How big a pump do we need? How big of pipes to pump it at certain speed? Up to the top again. So it was like a mini multiple person engineering project to figure out how to do this and what would be the weight of the liquid and what would be the all that kind of stuff. The tolerance of the 3/4 inch thick plexiglass that it ran down that had the orange lights underneath, and whether or not the lights were hot enough to melt the 3/4 inch plex, and on and on and on.
Which kind of worked because it's Mustafar. Melting is normal on Mustafar.
Yeah.
That's kind of works.
Yeah.
But, like you said, people often underestimate how many physical models were used in the prequels, in the Star Wars prequels. They talk about the CGI, and of course the CGI is incredible, but the models, especially Mustafar...
They would more than fill this room.
Yeah.
And they were, a lot of times, were really big. One time, it wasn't me, but one of the model makers in some kind of interview was asked, well, how big do you make the models? And he said, we never make a model bigger than it would fit into a dumpster.
Yeah.
Because that's usually
That's
where
good.
the really big ones go to. You'd get one of those big giant dumpsters, a couple of them, and fill them up with stuff. And then there were sometimes when people realized what we were sending off to the dump, and they would go to the dump and retrieve. And things would be for sale later on. And you think, we threw that away and it went to the dumpster.
Yeah, why don't you
and
just
here
keep
it is
it?
online. It's for sale.
Right. Oh my gosh.
I also, there was a little thing that briefly we were talking, and it occurred to me that in a way, when we first started doing Star Wars, we did it with X-Actos. We used a lot of X-Actos, super glue, that kind of thing. And by the time we were doing things like Mustafar, we were using machetes. I was thinking the difference in tools. And I had there was a knife sharpening company near right where we were, and I would buy like 10 machetes and take them off to the knife sharpener and say, I want them sharpened just like you would a kitchen knife. And I wanted the angle cut on the left side on half of them, and on the right side so I can make thin slices, because if you have it sharpened both ways, you can't hit it like that and get a small amount and control, a lot of control. And it's the way that, the reason I thought of it was that Japanese woodworkers and sculptors have tools that are right-handed and left-handed cut. Not that you would use it left-hand to right-hand, but trying to make a cut on the right-hand side with a left-hand side tool doesn't work. So anyway, I thought, machetes, that's a great idea. I made sure I just gave people lectures about using the safety lanyard that I made and all the stuff so that it would be awful for someone to miss and hurt themselves with a machete sharpened up like a kitchen knife. So I stopped everybody every once in a while and said, use your lanyard that you had to put your hand in, and it locked your hand on the arm and that kind of thing. But the whole thing was done that way. We tens of thousands of dollars of big foam blocks, 2 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot, of surfboard foam. And we had people, we said that here's the general masses and had them all glued together for us by the stage guys. But, to sit there and have all this tens of thousands of dollars of foam on this big platform, and then you're standing there with your machete and said, here we go. It's like it takes a lot of guts to do something like that. You have to feel and get the crew feeling totally confident that by the end of the time, you are going to get that thing carved, and it's going to look like a lava planet and all that stuff. Right. But it's, and that's one of the things that with the group of people you work with are all those people that it was like, it's going to happen. It's not, there's never, yes, there is doubt at times, but it's like you have the confidence that we've done it before. We'll surmount the mountain. We have a team of people that will do that. So.
Absolutely.
It's not really totally different from everything you guys do too. It's like you come in on Monday morning and the boss asks you to blank, 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 achieve something, and it's many times it's a different scale, and it's very physical too. It's not, it's not like working at a computer or doing that kind of thing. It's very, very physical. Yeah. And you come home looking like when I would do the sandblasting. Oh man, I came home just like the stuff was raining down, because what they would do is they do all the carving, but it looked too much like a carving. So what I would do is I take the sandblaster and only shoot up, so it made good stalactites, stalagmites.
So smart.
So that it really made it organic looking. What was done with a knife and a cutting tool and a machete then looked organic, because the Geonosians were supposed to have built their environment with like spit from like ants do. Ants use the liquid, and they take dirt and they make like adobe, to build their things. So it had to have that kind of a feeling. It wasn't like hammer and nails and 2x4s. It was more organic. And so one time, one of the guys who was new to the project, I looked and when he was on at lunchtime, I was looking how everybody had done it, and he had these little bridges between one area and another. And when he came back, I said, these guys fly. Nobody uses a bridge. If they want to go somewhere,
why would they need a bridge?
They get up and sit down. And they go, okay. All the little miniature bridges were gone.
Nice. You blew them up with the same technology as the X-Wings, just blow them up. What's funny, I was talking with, it's so weird to say, I was talking with Dennis Lawson earlier, who plays Wedge Antilles in Star Wars, and he told me that when he was on set in like the little cage, like doing the X-Wing, scene in the cockpit, it was so, like, he did not understand the scale of what Star Wars was going to be until he was in the theater. How was it for you building these models and then finally seeing the final product, like the movie?
Well, it was pretty exciting, especially the very first time with Star Wars. I saw Star Wars the very first time with the Carrie Fisher and Han Solo. I mean, and Harrison Ford was there, and the model makers and everything. And it was like when the Star Destroyer came overhead, it now had sound effects, dialogue, all that stuff, and music that it didn't have when we saw it. We saw little bits and pieces. And it's as if everybody gasped at the same time and sucked the air out of the room, is the way I describe it. As a tsunami headed towards you, it was really an experience, even though we'd seen every little bits and piece. But you see some things, like there's that scene where Luke walks out and looks at the double sunset near his house, that little dome. And I got to see that over and over again, and I just thought, oh God, how are they gonna make a movie? How is that gonna fit in the movie? That was a pretty boring scene, him walking out there and then doing it over and over again. And we saw a little bit of that, a little bit of the actors, and not an awful lot, but more models. But the models were all made with definitely think, how big is a person? We were thinking scale all the time, and where would the cameraman be? How tall is 6 feet where he has the camera, or is he on a boom? He's 10 feet off the ground. So at our scale, that means we need to build the model like as if from a 10-inch point of view, looking out. So what size is a human being? Where are they? What kind of camera are they on? And so we had a real good idea of what the scale was. We're always working with scale.
That's amazing. I want to listen to more of your stories, and I want to ask you so many more questions, but unfortunately we are running a little bit over on time.
I have a phone number you can call anytime with any question.
You can call him anytime.
Day or night.
Text, call, FaceTime, all the things. But you can, if you would like to meet Lorne, which I highly recommend you come and meet him. He has a table right out there, and you can come by and say hello and ask him all your questions. And
really, we're that long? How much?
We're at 4:47. We can go a little longer if you want to. How are we feeling? We're good? Okay. We can't?
But I was going to say, one time in India, I was talking at the embassy, and they were all off a half a day, and they wanted to hear about everything about the U.S. or model making, and I spoke for almost 4 hours. Because
we would go 4 hours, right? Thank you.
As soon as I was ready,
We're being played off.
Pack it down, someone would say, aren't you going to talk about poltergeist? And I'd say, okay, we'll show some videos of poltergeist. And then, but I stayed here late to hear Star Trek, and say, okay, Star Trek. Yes. And I allowed everybody, I said, some of you have babysitters, I know, you have places to go, pick up your kids. You can get up and walk out. I'll never feel bad about it, And so by the time 4 hours went by, there was only about 12 guys left in the front row, and they were all Star Trek fiends,
Trekkies. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Lorne, for being here, and thank you to everybody for coming. We really appreciate it.
Oh.